The encrypted message flashed on my private satellite link, a code read from the Brussels office, and I dismissed it with a swipe of my finger. The tremor in my son's voice during his phone call 5 minutes earlier was a far greater threat than any international crisis. For 35 years, I had built fortresses, first for governments, then for myself. But the most impenetrable fortress was the one I built around my own identity. To the world, I was Eleanor Vance, a retired mid-level office worker living a quiet, simple life in a comfortable but unremarkable townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia. To the few who knew the truth, I was the founder and silent director of Aegis Solutions, a global security and risk management firm whose clients included nations and Fortune 10 corporations. My net worth was a number I rarely contemplated, stored in assets and offshore accounts so complex they were themselves a form of camouflage. But to Liam, my only child, I was just mom. The woman who packed his lunches, helped with his homework, and now, he believed, lived on a modest pension, worrying about property taxes and the price of groceries. He had no idea that the consulting work I used to do involved negotiating with warlords, or that the simple locket I wore was a biometric key to systems that could darken entire city grids. The fiction of my ordinary life was the most valuable asset I had ever protected. His call had come as I was reviewing a threat assessment for a tech CEO. The shift from analyzing assassination plots to hearing the strained anxiety in my son's voice was a jolt that no amount of operational training could ever fully prepare me for. "Mom," he'd begun, the word tight like a clenched fist. "You're sitting down, right?" "I'm always sitting down, Liam. It's what retired people do." I'd already closed the secure file on my screen, my entire consciousness focusing on the subtle harmonics of his tone. Fear. Not of physical danger, but of social judgment. Good. Okay, so Isabella's parents, they're here, from Italy. It's a big deal, them visiting. They want to meet you. We've managed to get a reservation at Daniel, this Saturday, in New York. You have to come. Daniel. The name was a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a world I had consciously abandoned. A 3 Michelin-starred institution on Manhattan's Upper East Side, where the maitre d' held more power than a senator, and a single meal cost more than the monthly mortgage on my son's first home. It was a temple of curated excess, a world away from the honest simplicity of my garden and my books. The plea in his voice was a palpable thing. "Please, Mom, don't be weird. Don't be you. Be the version of you that I've told them about. The simple one." "Of course I'll be there, sweetheart. I can't wait to finally meet them." Then, the crucial intelligence-gathering question. "Exactly what have you told them about me?" The pause was a beat too long. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing, the rustle of him shifting the phone. "I told them you're retired, that you live comfortably but simply, that you're not, well, that you're not into all the flashy stuff, that you're a simple person." He'd rushed on, "In a good way. You're grounded, real." Simple. The word was a scalpel, expertly wielded, performing an unintentional amputation of my entire history. It severed the woman who had stared down a rogue intelligence director in a darkened Berlin safe house from the woman who now supposedly fretted over coupon clippings. It was a label that contained no hint of the storms I had weathered, the empires I had built from nothing but my own intellect and will. A cold, hard stone of disappointment settled in my gut, but my voice remained light, airy. "Well, he's not wrong," I chuckled. "I'll see you Saturday, Liam. I love you." I ended the call and sat in the profound silence of my study. The room was lined with books, real books, their spines cracked, their pages filled with my marginalia. It was the portrait of a thoughtful, quiet life. No one would guess that the first edition of Moby Dick on the shelf concealed a retinal scanner that led to a panic room equipped with satellite communications and an arsenal. This was my masterpiece, a life built in negative space, its true substance defined by what was absent: ostentation, noise, visibility. I didn't need to run a deep-level background check on Giuseppe and Sofia Rossi. I maintained passive, automated dossiers on anyone who entered Liam's inner circle. Giuseppe, a real estate developer with a reputation for ruthless deal-making and a love for the public spotlight. His wealth was a blaring trumpet, a declaration of arrival that I found tactically unsound. Sophia, a socialite whose life was a meticulously staged performance of elegance and cultural refinement, her worth seemingly measured in Instagram followers and society column inches. They were a different species of predator, their teeth hidden behind polished smiles and contracts, but predators nonetheless. And my son, my good, decent, hard-working son, was in love with their daughter. This dinner was not a social call. It was an inspection. I was the unknown variable, the potential flaw in their bloodline, the humble background they needed to assess, manage, and ultimately dismiss. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and precise, like the trajectory of a sniper's bullet. If they wanted simple, I would give them a masterpiece of simplicity. I would become Eleanor Vance, the downtrodden. Not just simple, but broke, naive, and pathetically grateful. I would walk into their den of wolves wearing the skin of the weakest lamb. It was the only way to force their true natures into the light. I needed to see if Isabella's love for my son could survive the naked contempt of her parents. And more importantly, Liam needed to see it. He needed to understand the price of admission into a family that valued pedigree and portfolios over character. The operative, a woman who had been dormant for years, stirred, her senses sharpening. The mission parameters were clear: infiltrate, observe, expose. The preparation was as detailed as any black bag operation. I drove 40 miles to a thrift store in a run-down strip mall, a place where my Alexandria neighbors would never wander. I found my costume, a dress in a sickly, washed-out lavender made of a synthetic blend that felt slick and cheap against the skin. It hung from my shoulders like a sack. I added a pair of scuffed, low-heeled pumps from a discount bin and a faded canvas tote bag that had once been a promotional item for a long-defunct insurance company. Back home, in the privacy of my bedroom, I began the transformation. I stood before the mirror and practiced. I let my shoulders slump, collapsing my posture into one of chronic weariness. I softened the focused intensity in my eyes, letting them become wide, slightly unfocused, and easily startled. I rehearsed a hesitant, self-effacing smile that never quite reached my eyes, a smile that begged for approval. I walked back and forth, adopting a shuffling gait, as if the very act of moving through the world was a burden. The reflection that stared back was a stranger, a woman eroded by life, her spirit dimmed, her presence an apology. She was perfect. The night of the dinner, I called a regular taxi. The journey from the gentle, tree-lined streets of Alexandria to the frenetic, glittering canyons of Manhattan was a journey between two worlds I had successfully kept separate. The taxi driver, a talkative man from Bangladesh, chatted about his family back home. I responded in the voice of my character, soft, slightly overwhelmed, and endlessly polite. "Oh my," I'd murmur, staring out at the blinding lights of Times Square as if it were an alien landscape. The duality was dizzying. Here I was, a woman who had orchestrated the defection of a nuclear scientist, playing the part of a rube from the suburbs. As the taxi neared its destination, a deep, profound sadness washed over me, so potent it felt like a physical ache. The mother in me, the part that was pure and unstrategic, still clung to a desperate, foolish hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe beneath the layers of wealth and privilege, Giuseppe and Sofia Rossi were kind. Maybe they would see a fellow human being, a mother who had sacrificed for her son. Maybe they would look past the thrift store dress and see a soul, But the strategist, the Sphinx, knew the truth. Hope was a vulnerability. It clouded judgment, and in any high-stakes confrontation, clear-eyed judgment was the only thing that stood between you and disaster. The taxi pulled up to the curb. Daniel was exactly as I had pictured it, imposing, elegant, and radiating an aura of exclusion. A doorman in immaculate livery stood guard, his expression a mask of neutral superiority. I paid the driver with a handful of crumpled bills, making a small show of counting it twice. I stepped out onto the pavement. The cool night air of New York was thick with the scent of money and exhaust fumes. I smoothed the cheap fabric of my dress, my hands trembling slightly, a detail I did not have to fake. I gripped the handles of my canvas tote, took a shallow, shaky breath, and began my approach. My worn-down shoes made no sound on the polished granite. The doorman's eyes swept over me, and for a fleeting moment, his mask slipped, revealing a flicker of pure, unadulterated disdain. It was the look one gives a stray animal that has wandered into a formal garden. He pulled the heavy, brass-handled door open with a gloved hand, his gaze already moving past me to the next, more suitable arrival. The transition was instantaneous. The noise of the city vanished, replaced by a hushed, reverential silence. The air was warm and scented with tuberose and beeswax. The light was golden, falling softly on damask walls and the glint of crystal. It was a world of immense, quiet power. And then I saw them, Liam, standing by a table near the window, his face a canvas of anxiety. He looked handsome in his new suit, but he wore it like a costume. Beside him, Isabella was a vision in a sheath of ivory silk, but her smile was strained, her eyes darting nervously between me and her parents. And there, seated at the table like thrones, were Giuseppe and Sophia Rossi. He was a large man, his custom-tailored suit failing to conceal a visceral aggression. His watch was a thick, gold monstrosity that screamed its price. She was a slender, sharp-featured woman, her emerald green dress and glittering diamonds a calculated display of wealth and taste, her eyes missing nothing. They were all looking directly at me. Liam's face fell. I saw the shock, the embarrassment, the sheer horror as he took in the entirety of my pathetic presentation. It was the reaction he had been desperately hoping to avoid. I offered a small, wavering, timid smile and took one hesitant, shuffling step forward into the lion's den. The fortress was breached. The mission was live. The silence that greeted my entrance was more profound than any I had experienced in secure briefing rooms. It was a vacuum of sound, broken only by the faint clinking of crystal from a distant table. Every eye at the table was fixed on me, Liam's wide with panic, Isabella's with pained embarrassment, and her parents with unveiled assessment. In that suspended moment, I felt the weight of 30 years of deception pressing down on me, the carefully constructed walls of my ordinary life trembling at their foundations. "Mom?" Liam's voice cracked as he stood, the single word an accusation and a plea. He moved to pull out my chair, his movements stiff with tension. "You're here." "Of course, sweetheart," I murmured, letting my voice quaver just slightly. I kept my eyes downcast, my shoulders hunched, in a posture of submission I had perfected over decades of playing roles in far more dangerous situations than this. Isabella offered a tight, pained smile. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you." Her eyes darted to her parents, then back to me, a silent apology in their depths. "These are my parents, Giuseppe and Sophia Rossi." Giuseppe rose with the slow, deliberate movement of a man accustomed to others waiting on his pleasure. His handshake was brief, his grip just a bit too firm, a testing squeeze that I made sure to return with a limp, uncertain pressure. "A pleasure," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried through the hushed room. His eyes swept over me in one comprehensive, dismissive glance, cataloging the thrift store dress, the worn shoes, and the hopelessly out-of-place canvas bag. Sophia did not stand. She offered a hand adorned with diamonds that caught the light, her touch as cold and brief as her husband's. "So this is the famous Eleanor," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Liam has told us so much about you." Her eyes were analytical, stripping away the layers of my cheap clothing to assess the woman beneath and finding her wanting. I felt Liam tense beside me, a live wire of anxiety. "All good things, I hope," I said, letting my voice trail off into uncertainty, my eyes dropping to the starched white tablecloth. "But of course," Sophia's tone was sweetly condescending. She gestured to the menu the waiter had just placed before me. "I hope you don't find the menu too intimidating. The French can be so particular about their cuisine." The leather-bound menu felt heavy in my hands, the gold-embossed script elegant and foreign. I made a show of opening it, my eyes widening at the prices. "Oh, my," I breathed, the picture of overwhelmed innocence. "It's also fancy. I usually just have the meatloaf special at the diner down the street for me. The nice waitress there, Brenda, always gives me extra gravy." Across the table, Giuseppe made a sound that was half chuckle, half snort. Liam looked as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Perhaps," Sophia said, her voice dripping with false kindness, "I could order for you. Something simple, accessible." She didn't wait for my response, turning to the waiter who had materialized at her elbow. "We'll start with the foie gras for the table, but for Mrs. Vance, the garden salad, dressing on the side. And for her main, the roasted chicken, plain. Nothing too rich for her constitution." The dismissal was so complete, so utterly arrogant, that I had to concentrate to keep the fire in my veins from showing in my eyes. Instead, I looked up at her with what I hoped was pathetic gratitude. "You're so kind," I gashed. "It's all so confusing." The first course arrived. Tiny, architectural constructions of food that looked more like modern art than sustenance. Sophia took it upon herself to explain each element to me with the exaggerated patience of someone addressing a slow child. "And this," she said, pointing with a perfectly manicured nail to the terrine of foie gras, "is duck liver, a delicacy, quite expensive." She watched me, waiting for a reaction. I picked up my fork with uncertain fingers, making sure my grip was slightly clumsy. "I've never had duck liver before," I said, my voice small. "We usually just have chicken at home, or sometimes, when it's on sale, a nice pot roast. The nice waitress there, Brenda, always gives me extra gravy." Giuseppe chuckled again, a low, condescending sound. "Well, there's a first time for everything, isn't there, Eleanor?" The conversation, what little of it there was, turned to the Rossies' recent travels. It was a masterclass in casual, unstated wealth. Giuseppe mentioned their villa in Tuscany, the restoration of the 15th century beams, a nightmare, but worth it for the views. Sophia lamented the crowds in Stade that winter, but the skiing had been, as always, superb. They spoke of shopping trips to Paris, of private tours of museums in Florence, of yacht parties in Monaco. Each anecdote was dropped like a carefully placed stone in a pond, the ripples meant to illustrate the vast distance between their world and mine. "And you, Eleanor?" Sophia asked during a lull, her eyes sharp with feigned interest. "Do you travel much?" I shook my head, looking down at my plate as if ashamed. "Oh, no, not really. The farthest I've been is Florida, to visit my sister. The flight was quite expensive, but she paid for it. She said I needed a vacation." I let my voice drop to a confidential whisper. I think she just felt sorry for me being all alone in that big house since Liam moved out. I saw the look that passed between Giuseppe and Sophia, a mixture of pity and satisfaction. I was exactly what they had expected. I was confirming every prejudiced assumption they had made about Liam's simple mother from Virginia. Liam, to his credit, tried to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Mom's garden is really something," he said, his voice strained. "You should see her roses. She's won first prize at the county fair 3 years running." Sophia waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her wrist glittering. "Roses are lovely, of course, quaint, though we've found the climate in Milan is better for orchids. We have a magnificent collection. Our gardener, Paolo, is a true artist. He used to work for the Borghese family, you know." The main courses arrived, and with them the conversation took a more serious, predatory turn. Giuseppe fixed me with a direct, assessing look. "Liam tells us you live alone now," he said, his tone implying this was a personal failing. "That must be difficult on a fixed income." "I manage," I said softly, pushing a piece of chicken around my plate. "I'm careful with my money. I clip coupons. The nice boy at the market, Javier, he always saves the best cuts of meat for me when he knows I'm coming." "Of course," Sophia said, her voice oozing a sympathy as fake as her tan. She reached across the table and patted my hand, her touch like ice. "It's so admirable how you've managed all these years. Raising a son alone, well, it's no small feat." There was something in her tone, a subtle venom that suggested the exact opposite, that my struggle was a sign of weakness, not strength. "Liam was always a good boy," I said, looking at my son with genuine love, letting it shine through the character I was playing for just a moment. "He made it easy." "He's turned into a fine man," Giuseppe conceded, though his eyes remained critical, scanning Liam as if he were a business acquisition that hadn't proven its worth. "He's turned into a fine man," he conceded, though his eyes remained critical, scanning Liam as if he were a business acquisition that hadn't proven its worth. "We're pleased Isabella chose someone with such solid values. A good, stable background." The subtext was as clear as the crystal water glasses. They were pleased he wasn't from their world, that he came without the baggage of an influential family, that he could be molded to fit their needs. He was a blank slate, and I was the barely illiterate inscription in the corner to be politely ignored. As dessert was served, tiny, exquisite constructions of chocolate and gold leaf that probably cost more than my fictional weekly grocery bill, Sophia leaned forward, her expression shifting from condescendingly pleasant to seriously falsely maternal. "Eleanor, dear, there's something we'd like to discuss with you, as family." I felt Liam stiffen beside me. "Mom, maybe this isn't the—" "Nonsense," Giuseppe interrupted, his voice brooking no argument. "We're all family here. We should be able to speak frankly." Sophia gave me her most sympathetic, understanding smile. It was a terrifying thing to behold. "We know things can't be easy for you financially," she said, her voice soft as silk wrapping a razor blade. "And we were thinking, well, we'd like to help. We could provide a small monthly stipend, nothing much, but enough to make things more comfortable for you. Take some of the pressure off." I stared at her, letting my mouth fall slightly open in veined shock. I couldn't possibly." $500 a month, Giuseppe said, briskly, as if we were negotiating the price of a used car. "It's the least we can do for the woman who raised such a fine son. Consider it a gesture of goodwill, a way to ensure you can enjoy your retirement without worry." The bribe was on the table, naked and ugly. They weren't even trying to hide it. $500 a month to make me disappear, to ensure the poor, embarrassing mother didn't interfere with their daughter's perfect life with their newly acquired malleable son-in-law. Liam was pale, his hands clenched into fists on the tablecloth. "This is inappropriate," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and shame. "We're not here to—" "Now, son," Giuseppe said, his tone patronizing, dismissing Liam's protest as if he were a misbehaving child. "We're just trying to help your mother. There's no shame in accepting help when it's offered from a place of genuine care." I looked from face to face. Sophia's mask of fake sympathy, Giuseppe's cold calculation, Liam's humiliated anger, Isabella's pained silence. This was the moment. They had shown me their true faces, their utter contempt for anyone they perceived as beneath them. They had confirmed every suspicion, validated every fear. The mission was a success. The intelligence had been gathered, but the cost felt higher than I had anticipated. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my napkin on the table. The movement was different now. The hesitant, clumsy quality was gone, replaced by a fluid, precise grace. When I looked up, my posture had changed. The slouch was gone, my spine straight, my shoulders squared. The wide, uncertain eyes had vanished, replaced by a gaze of cold, analytical clarity. The room seemed to still, the air growing thick with sudden, unspoken tension. $500, I said, my voice no longer timid and quavering, but sharp, clear, and cutting as a shard of glass. It was my real voice, the one that had commanded boardrooms and briefed presidents. How very interesting. Sophia blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Eleanor?" "I was just doing the math in my head," I continued, my tone conversational, yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "That's $6,000 a year to make me disappear from my son's life, to ensure the simple mother from Virginia doesn't embarrass the fine Rossi family at country club events or society weddings. A modest price to pay for your peace of mind, I suppose." Giuseppe's eyes narrowed, his affable mask slipping to reveal the hard-eyed businessman beneath. "Now see here, my familiarity with French cuisine, by the apparent balance in my bank account. You have offered me charity while demonstrating you possess not a single ounce of it yourselves. You have looked at my son, a good, brilliant, kind man, and seen only a project, an accessory for your daughter that needs to be properly vetted and its inconvenient parts monetarily silenced." Liam was staring at me as if he had never seen me before. "Mom," he whispered, the word filled with confusion and dawning realization. I turned to him, my expression softening for just a moment, allowing the real, aching love I felt for him to show through. "I'm sorry, Liam. I am so sorry. But you needed to see this. You needed to see who they really are." Sophia had recovered her composure, her face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but—" "The game is over, Sophia," I said, my voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. "The performance is done. You wanted to meet the simple, retired Eleanor Vance? I'm afraid you've been dining with Eleanor Vance, former Deputy Director of the National Clandestine Service and current CEO at Aegis International." I let the words hang in the air, watching as their meaning slowly dawned on their faces. "My firm handles security for several governments, and, if I'm not mistaken, your European investment portfolio, Giuseppe. We prevented that hostile takeover of your Milan holdings last spring. You're welcome, by the way." The silence that fell was absolute, profound, broken only by the sharp intake of Isabella's breath. Giuseppe's face had gone ashen. That's impossible," he stammered, but the doubt was already creeping into his eyes. "Is it?" I reached into my faded canvas tote, the movement sure and deliberate. From it, I pulled out a simple black leather wallet. I extracted a single matte black business card, with silver embossing and slitted across the pristine white tablecloth. It came to a stop directly in front of Giuseppe's untouched dessert. My card. Feel free to verify the details. The direct line to my office is on the back. My executive assistant, David, will be expecting your call. Sophia snatched up the card, her fingers trembling slightly. Her eyes scanned the elegant text, her lips moving soundlessly as she read. Her face, usually a masterpiece of controlled expression, crumpled into a mask of stunned disbelief. This can't be. Liam found his voice, though it was raw with shock. Mom, what is this? What are you saying? The truth, Liam, I said, my heart aching at the hurt and confusion in his eyes. The truth I have been protecting you from your entire life. The woman you've been so embarrassed of tonight, the woman they've been condescending to and trying to pay off, signs contracts worth more than their net worth. The simple mother you thought you had to protect from this world, she could buy this restaurant, fire the staff that looked down on her, and purchase the building for a tax write-off. Giuseppe had found his voice, though it was several octaves higher than usual. That's impossible. I don't believe you. This is some kind of bluff. Believe what you want, I said, standing up. The cheap, shapeless dress suddenly seemed like a costume of immense power. But understand this clearly. The only reason I am walking out of here instead of systematically dismantling your reputation and your business is because my son loves your daughter. But if I ever hear that you have treated him with anything less than the absolute respect he deserves, if I ever get so much as a hint that you are trying to manipulate him or control his life, I will use every resource at my disposal to tear your gilded world apart, brick by gilded brick. And trust me, I added, my gaze locking with Giuseppe's, I know exactly where all the bodies are buried. I helped hide some of them. I turned to Liam, whose world was visibly shattering and reassembling itself in real time. I'm sorry it had to be this way, sweetheart. Truly. But you needed to see who these people are when they think no one of consequence is watching. Call me when you're ready to talk. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, a gesture I hadn't made in years. He was too stunned to react. I didn't look back as I walked out of the restaurant. The maitre d', who had watched my entrance with barely concealed disdain, now watched my exit with a look of bewildered, newfound respect. The timid, overwhelmed woman had vanished, replaced by a figure of absolute, unassailable authority. Outside, the cool night air felt clean and sharp in my lungs. I hailed a cab with a single sharp gesture, my mind already shifting from the emotional wreckage to the strategic aftermath. Liam would be angry, he would be hurt, he would feel betrayed, but he would also be free. Free from their manipulation, free to make his own choices based on truth, not on the carefully curated fiction I had maintained for so long. As the cab pulled away from the glittering facade of Daniel, I allowed myself one single, shuddering breath of regret. Not for exposing the Rossis for the arrogant, status-obsessed people they were, but for the lie I had lived for 30 years. The fortress I had built to protect my son had become a prison for us both, and tonight I had finally, irrevocably, torn down the walls. The truth was out. The mission was over, and nothing, for any of us, would ever be the same again. The silence I left behind in the restaurant was more explosive than any bomb I had ever diffused. I knew this, not because I could hear it, but because I had spent a lifetime reading the echoes of such detonations. As my taxi merged into the relentless current of New York traffic, I could feel the shock waves radiating outward from Daniel, tearing through the carefully constructed realities of everyone I had left at that table. The cool leather seat against my back felt familiar and alien. For the first time in 30 years, I was riding in a vehicle without armor plating, without a trained driver, without any protection at all. I had just detonated my own life, and the strange calm that settled over me was the same eerie stillness that follows a Category 5 storm. My phone began to vibrate in my cheap canvas bag. Not the subtle pulse of my secured line, but the jarring rattle of the civilian device. Liam. Of course. I let it go to voicemail, my fingers steady as I watched the glittering skyline slide past the window. He needed time to process, to rage, to confront the Rosies with the new, terrifying knowledge I had unleashed upon them. Any words I offered now would be like trying to put out a chemical fire with water, useless and potentially explosive. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Rough night, ma'am?" "You have no idea," I said, and for the first time all evening, my voice held no artifice. It was simply tired. The voice of a woman who had carried the weight of nations and was now buckling under the weight of her own deception. He nodded sagely. "This city, it chews people up, spits 'em out. You want I should take the scenic route? Give you a minute to breathe?" I almost said yes. The temptation to delay, to hide in the anonymous darkness of a moving vehicle was overwhelming, but hiding was what had brought me to this moment. "No," I said, my voice firming. "The faster, the better." Back at the table I had abandoned, I could imagine the scene unfolding with cinematic clarity. Liam would be standing, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions, betrayal, confusion, a dawning horrified understanding. He would be looking from Isabella's pale, shocked face to her parents' frozen masks of fury and humiliation. The business card I had left behind would sit between them like a live grenade, its simple black and white design a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. "Who is she?" Giuseppe Razzi would be demanding, his voice tight with a rage he could no longer contain. He would be looking not at Liam, but at his daughter, as if she were complicit in this ambush. But it would be Sophia who would truly break first. Her pride, that meticulously polished artifact, would be in jagged pieces around her. "You knew," she would hiss at Liam, her voice venomous. "You set this up. You brought that spy into our lives to humiliate us?" Liam, my good, honest son, would be shaking his head, his worldview shattered. "I didn't. She's my mom. She's just my mom." The word "just" tasted like ash in his mouth. And Isabella, I could see her, a statue of quiet devastation, watching the family she knew implode, realizing the foundation of her own life was built on the same shallow, judgmental sand. Her silence throughout the dinner now screamed of her own complicity, her own fear. The taxi pulled up to my townhouse. The familiar sight of my dark windows and quiet porch should have been a comfort, but tonight it felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I paid the driver, over-tipping him with cash from the wallet of Eleanor Vance, the simple mother. It felt like using someone else's money. Inside, the silence was absolute. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing over the back of the sofa, the edge of the kitchen counter. Every object, every piece of furniture was part of the set dressing for my performance. The cozy Afghan, the collection of ceramic birds, the well-stocked but modest pantry, all lies. I went to the bookshelf and pressed the hidden catch. With a soft hiss, the panels slid back, revealing the cold, blue-lit interior of my true sanctuary. The room was a study in stark efficiency. Banks of monitors showed live feeds from security cameras around the globe. A secure laptop sat next to a rack of servers that hummed with quiet power. On the wall hung a single framed photograph, a much younger me, standing between a former CIA director and a man who was now the head of MI6. We were all smiling, but our eyes were old. I sat in the ergonomic chair and woke the systems. Alerts flashed. Messages from my second-in-command, David, requesting confirmation of the Brussels situation. I typed a quick, coded all clear. Then I opened a new file. Operation Truth. Status complete. Outcome catastrophic success. My secured line buzzed. Not Liam. David. Eleanor. His voice was calm, a rock in the storm of my emotions. We have a situation. Giuseppe Rossi's office has made 3 separate attempts to access our client verification portal in the last 10 minutes. Of course, he was checking my credentials. Let them through, I said, my voice flat. Give them full, verified access to my corporate profile. I want there to be no doubt. A pause. Eleanor, are you sure? This will expose your cover, the work you've done. The work is done, David, I interrupted, the weariness seeping back into my bones. The mission is over. The asset is emancipated. The asset was my son. The words felt like broken glass in my mouth. As you wish. Another pause, this one heavier. There's more. Our monitoring of the Rossi financials has picked up anomalous activity. Large, frantic transfers between their European and stateside accounts. It appears they are preparing for a financial assault. A dry, humorless laugh escaped me. They think they can fight me with money. It was like bringing a knife to a nuclear war. Let them scurry. Monitor it. I want to know every move they make. I ended the call and leaned back, closing my eyes. The image of Liam's face, that final look of shattered trust, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I had done this to protect him, to show him the viper's nest he was walking into, but in doing so, I had become a viper myself. I had lied to him every day of his life. I had stolen from him the mother he thought he had. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Liam. How could you? 3 words. A universe of pain. I stared at them, my fingers hovering over the screen. What could I say? That I did it for him? That the world was a dangerous place and I needed him to be safe, to be normal, to be untouched by the darkness I knew existed? It was the truth, but it was also the excuse of every controlling parent throughout history. I didn't reply. There were no words that could bridge the chasm I had just opened between us. Instead, I pulled up the live feed from the security camera I had discreetly placed in the restaurant's lobby before entering. It was a habit, a leftover from a life of contingency planning. The feed showed the Rossis storming out, their faces thunderous. Giuseppe was on his phone, barking orders. Sophia clutched her fur coat around her as if it could protect her from the chill of her own humiliation. They didn't look at each other. A moment later, Liam and Isabella emerged. They were holding hands, but their postures were stiff, distant. They stood under the awning, the rain painting silver streaks in the air between them and the world. They were talking, their heads close together. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the language of their bodies. His shoulders were hunched with the weight of betrayal. Hers were squared with a newfound, desperate resolve. Isabella was saying something, her hands gesturing emphatically. She was defending him, defending me. Liam was shaking his head, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of such profound frustration it made my heart ache. He looked up, his eyes scanning the street as if he could find answers in the passing headlights. In that moment, he looked exactly like the little boy who had lost his favorite toy in the park, utterly lost and bewildered. Then he did something that shattered what was left of my composure. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving over the screen, and held it to his ear. My secured line, the one only 3 people in the world had the number for, remained silent. But the civilian phone in my canvas bag, the one he believed was my only phone, began to ring. He was calling the character. He was calling the simple mother, hoping to find some anchor in the wreckage. He wasn't ready to speak to the woman I really was. I let it ring. Each tone was a nail in the coffin of my old life. When it went to voicemail, I saw his shoulders slump. He ended the call and said something to Isabella. Then he turned and walked away, not toward the waiting town car her parents had left in, but into the rain-swept street, disappearing into the New York night alone. I sat in the blue glow of my command center, the ghost of my son's voice echoing in the silence. The fortress was secure, the mission was a success, the target had been neutralized, and I had never felt more like a failure in my entire life. The aftershocks were just beginning, and I was at their epicenter, waiting for the ground to swallow me whole. The walls I had built to keep the world out had become my prison, and the key I had just used to free my son had locked me inside forever. The rain began to fall in earnest just as Liam disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the neon-drenched New York night. I watched from my command center, the cold blue light of the monitors reflecting in my unblinking eyes. The live feed from the restaurant's security camera showed Isabella standing alone under the awning, a solitary figure in a sea of shimmering wet pavement. She didn't move to follow Liam, nor did she attempt to call after him. She just stood there, her ivory silk dress now seeming like a shroud, her hands clenched at her sides. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and looked directly into the hidden camera, as if she could sense my gaze upon her. Her eyes, even through the pixelated feed, held a startling clarity, not of anger, but of resolute. It was in that moment I knew the battle lines had been redrawn, and the war for my son's future was far from over. My secured line buzzed, David again. Eleanor, the Rossi situation is escalating. Giuseppe has just initiated a series of high-frequency transfers between his Zurich and Cayman accounts. He's liquidating assets at a concerning rate. It appears he's preparing for something. Let him, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Track every transaction. I want to know where every penny goes. But do not interfere. There was a certain poetic justice in it. The man who measured everyone's worth by their wealth was now frantically trying to fortify his own, terrified of a threat he couldn't comprehend. Understood. There's more. We're detecting chatter on a private server the Rossis use for their business communications. Sophia is not handling this well. She's demanding they cut Isabella off completely unless she severs ties with Liam immediately. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was the true cost of my revelation. Not the financial panic of an arrogant man, but the potential destruction of a young woman's relationship with her family and, by extension, my son's heart. Continue monitoring. I need to know everything they say. I ended the call and finally powered down the command center. The blue light died, plunging the room into a darkness so complete it felt like being buried. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of my own breathing, the weight of 30 years of secrets pressing down on me. The fortress was secure, but the queen was in chains of her own making. I didn't sleep. I moved through the quiet house like a ghost, touching the artifacts of my fabricated life. The cross-stitched "Home Sweet Home" on the wall, the collection of souvenir mugs from various national parks I'd never visited, and the photo albums filled with pictures of a smiling, ordinary woman at school plays and birthday parties, a woman who never truly existed. I had created the perfect cover, and in doing so, I had erased myself. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and rose, my civilian phone lit up. Not Liam. Isabella. Can we talk, please? Not at Daniel. Somewhere neutral. She included an address, a small, independent coffee shop in Greenwich Village, a place with no memories, no associations, a place to build something new or to burn the last bridges. I replied with a single word. Yes. The coffee shop was exactly as I'd imagined from the address, warm, slightly shabby, filled with the rich aroma of roasted beans and the quiet hum of students and writers tapping on laptops. I arrived first, choosing a table in the back, away from the window. I wore simple slacks and a sweater, a compromise between Eleanor Vance, retired mother, and Eleanor Vance, former spymaster. I was neither, and both. Isabella arrived 10 minutes later. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her usually immaculate hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wore no makeup. In jeans and a simple black jacket, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and infinitely more real than the polished socialite from the night before. She slid into the seat opposite me, her hands wrapped around a takeout cup of tea she'd bought at the counter. For a long moment, she just looked at me, her gaze searching, assessing. "You knew," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "You knew exactly what they were like, and you walked right into it." "I suspected," I corrected gently. "I needed confirmation, and I needed Liam to see it for himself." "Was it worth it?" she asked, and there was no accusation in her tone, only a profound sadness. "Breaking him? Humiliating my parents? Was it worth the price?" The question hung between us, the central, unanswerable query of my entire existence. "I don't know," I admitted, the truth feeling like a confession. I thought it was. I thought showing him the truth was the only way to protect him from a life of being controlled, of being looked down upon, of never being quite good enough for the great Rossi family. I met her gaze, but I didn't account for the cost to you, or to him. I thought I was giving him a gift. I think I may have just given him a wound that will never fully heal. Isabella looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "He didn't come home last night," she whispered. "I don't know where he is. He's not answering his phone." She looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "My parents, my father told me I was dead to them if I didn't leave him, that he was tainted by your deception. My mother said she would never allow a grandchild of hers to have a grandmother who was a spy." She almost choked on the word. The anger that rose in me then was cold and pure. It was one thing for them to come after me, but to threaten their own daughter, to try and poison the future over their wounded pride. "What did you tell them?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "I told them they were the ones who were dead, dead inside, that I finally saw them for what they are, that I loved Liam and I was choosing him." She wiped the tear away with an angry, swift motion. "But I'm scared. I've never stood up to them like that. I've never been without them." In that moment, I didn't see the daughter of my enemies. I saw a brave, terrified young woman who had just chosen a path of incredible difficulty for the sake of love. I saw my son's future. "Isabella," I said, leaning forward, "look at me." She did. "You are not without family. You have Liam, and you have me, whatever that is worth." She gave a watery, hesitant smile. "It's worth a lot, I think, even if it's complicated." We sat in silence for a moment, a tentative truce forming in the steam rising from our cups. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "we find Liam, and we give him the one thing I've been denying him his entire life, the unvarnished, complicated, messy truth. All of it." It took us 3 hours. David, using resources that would make any intelligence agency green with envy, located Liam's phone signal at a run-down motel on the outskirts of Jersey City. He had driven through the night, putting physical distance between himself and the epicenter of the explosion. The motel was a bleak 2-story structure that smelled of damp concrete and despair. I found his rental car parked in a shadowy corner of the lot. Isabella waited in my car, giving us space. The door to room 114 was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. Liam was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing the suit from last night, though the jacket was discarded on the floor and the tie was loose around his neck. He was staring at the blank screen of the television, his face a mask of utter exhaustion and desolation. He didn't look up as I entered. "How did you find me?" "I have my ways," I said softly, closing the door behind me. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Right, because you're not my mom. You're whatever you are, a ghost, a lie. I am your mother, I said, my voice breaking on the word. That is the one true thing in all of this. Everything I did, every lie I told, every secret I kept was to protect you, to give you a normal life, a safe life. He finally turned to look at me, and the raw pain in his eyes was a physical blow. A normal life? You think this is normal? Finding out your mother is some international woman of mystery? That my whole childhood was a carefully staged play? You didn't give me a normal life, Mom. You gave me a fabricated one. You made me a character in your fiction. He stood up, his voice rising. All those times you said you were tired from work, were you really? Or were you just back from toppling a government somewhere? Liam, did you ever think about what I wanted? He demanded, cutting me off. Did you ever think that maybe I would have wanted to know my mother? The real one? Not this pleasant, simple stranger you created for me. You took that choice away from me. You decided who I got to have as a mother. His words landed with the force of truth. He was right. In my obsession with protecting him from the world, I had protected him from me. I had robbed him of the choice to know the complex, flawed, powerful woman I was. And in doing so, I had given him a phantom. I was wrong, I said, the words foreign and heavy on my tongue. I, who had never admitted failure to anyone, said them to my son. I was so afraid. The world I lived in, it's dark, Liam. It changes you. It scars you. I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to be light. I wanted you to be good. And you are. You are so good. Better than I could have ever hoped for. And I was terrified that my world would taint that it would taint you. He was silent, watching me, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Isabella? He asked, his voice muffled. She's outside. She stood up to her parents for you. She chose you. He looked up, a flicker of something, maybe hope, in his devastated eyes. She did. She's braver than I gave her credit for, and she loves you very much. We sat in the dim, musty room, the silence now a shared space, heavy with pain but no longer hostile. What do I call you now? He asked, his voice small. Mom? Or Eleanor Vance, CEO and super spy? I moved to sit beside him, careful not to touch him. You call me Mom. That's who I am to you. That's the only part of this that really matters. The rest is just a job I was good at. But being your mother, that was my purpose. He was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I need time, Mom. I can't just flip a switch and be okay with this. Everything I thought I knew, it's all gone. I know, I said, my heart aching with a love so fierce it threatened to consume me. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. And this time, no more secrets. You want to know about the real me? Ask. I'll tell you everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I stood to leave, giving him the space he needed. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. Mom? I turned. The woman at the restaurant, the one who stared down the Rossies and didn't flinch, is she the real you? I looked at my son, really looked at him, seeing not the boy I needed to protect, but the man he had become, a man capable of handling complex and difficult truths. She's a part of me, I said. Just like the woman who made you chicken soup when you were sick is a part of me. We're all made of pieces. Some of mine are just sharper than others. I left him there in the quiet gloom, the first fragile threads of a new understanding beginning to weave themselves between us. The reckoning had come, and we had all been found wanting. But in the ashes of the lies, there was a chance, a fragile, trembling chance, for something real to finally grow. The silence in the motel room after I left was a living thing, thick with unspoken words and the ghosts of shattered illusions. I walked back to my car, each step feeling heavier than the last. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She looked up as I opened the door, her eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I had. "Well?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He needs time," I said, sliding behind the wheel. The leather seat felt cold against my back. The drive back to the city was shrouded in a silence more profound than any I had experienced in soundproof interrogation rooms. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the amber glow of streetlights. The world washed clean, but still carrying the memory of the storm. Dropped Isabella at her apartment building, a modern glass tower that suddenly seemed as fragile as the family it housed. "Will you be okay?" I asked as she unbuckled her seatbelt. She paused, her hand on the door handle. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But for the first time, I feel like I'm breathing real air, even if it hurts to breathe." She gave me a small, tentative smile. "Thank you for coming to the coffee shop." "Thank you," I replied, "for choosing my son." I watched her walk into the building, a solitary figure stepping into an uncertain future, and felt a surge of respect for this young woman who had just traded gilded certainty for difficult truth. My townhouse welcomed me with its familiar silence, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a museum, a carefully curated exhibit of a life that had never truly been lived. I didn't go to the command center. Instead, I poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a simple glass and sat in the dark of my living room, staring out at the night. The mission was over, but the war for my son's heart had just begun. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended animation. David kept me updated on the Rossies' frantic financial maneuvers. They were circling the wagons, preparing for a siege that would never come. I instructed him to stand down, to merely observe. Their panic was punishment enough. Liam didn't call. The silence from him was a physical ache, a constant hum of absence in my life. I respected his need for space, but with each passing hour, the fear that I had lost him forever grew, a cold, sharp stone in my gut. On the 4th morning, as I was mechanically watering the roses in my garden, a futile attempt to reconnect with the ghost of my former self, a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a taxi or a delivery truck. It was Liam's car. My heart stuttered in my chest. I set down the watering can, my hands trembling slightly, and watched as he got out. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, but he stood straighter than he had in the motel room. He walked up the path, his steps measured, his gaze fixed on me. We stood there for a moment, separated by a few feet of brick pathway and a chasm of deception, the morning sun warm on our faces. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Hi, Liam," I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. He looked around the garden, at the blooming roses, the neat borders, the comfortable, ordinary house. "It's a good disguise," he said, not with anger but with a kind of weary acceptance. "It really is." "It wasn't meant to be a disguise for you," I said softly. "It was meant to be a home." He nodded slowly, his eyes finally meeting mine. "I know. I've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of reading." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded printout. It was a declassified, a CIA report from the early 2000s detailing the prevention of a catastrophic cyber attack on the national power grid. My codename, Sphinx, was redacted, but the details were unmistakable. This was you, wasn't it? I stared at the paper, a relic from a life I thought I had buried. "How did you find this?" "I'm an architect, Mom. I'm good at finding the underlying structure of things. Once I started looking, the pieces were all there.
The business trips that always coincided with international crises. The way you could always calm me down when I was scared as a kid, like you had a lifetime of practice dealing with panic. He gave a small, shaky smile. The way you never, ever seemed afraid of anything. I felt the walls around my heart, the ones I had built so carefully and so high, begin to crumble. I was always afraid. Every single day. I was afraid for you. He took a step closer. Isabella and I talked. For a long time. She showed me the texts from her mother, the things they said about you, about us. His jaw tightened. They called you a criminal, a fraud. They said I was a project for Isabella, a charity case. I'm sorry you had to see that. Don't be, he said, his voice gaining strength, because it made me realize something. You might have lied about who you were, but you never lied about what you believed in. You believed in me. You believed in keeping me safe. You believed in doing hard things for the right reasons. He gestured with the printout. This report says millions could have died without your work. My mom. You did that. Tears I had held back for 30 years finally welled in my eyes, blurring his face. It was just a job, Liam. No, he said, taking the final steps to close the distance between us. He put his hands on my shoulders, his grip firm and sure. It wasn't. It was who you are, a part of you, a part you gave up for me. He pulled me into a hug, and it was different from any hug we had ever shared. It wasn't the hug of a child to his mother, but the embrace of one adult acknowledging the profound, complicated sacrifice of another. I'm not okay with the lies, and we have a lot to talk about, a lifetime to talk about. But I understand why, and I am so incredibly proud to be your son. I held him tightly, the sobs I had suppressed for decades finally breaking free, silent and shuddering. We stood there in the garden, amidst the roses and the lies, and the terrible, beautiful truth, and for the first time, we were just a mother and her son. No masks, no fortresses, just the unbreakable thread of love that had survived it all. The reconciliation was not an end, but a beginning. Leah moved back home with me temporarily, not out of need, but out of a mutual desire to rebuild. Our conversations were long and often painful. I told him about his father, a fellow operative who had died on a mission before he was born. I told him about the constant fear, the moral compromises, the weight of carrying the world's secrets. He listened, he asked questions, and he began to see the woman behind the myth, flawed and fierce, and endlessly devoted to him. Isabella became a constant presence in our home. Freed from the gilded cage of her parents' expectations, she blossomed. She and Liam started their own architectural firm together, focusing on sustainable, affordable housing, a direct and deliberate rejection of her father's empire of glass and steel monuments to wealth. They worked from my dining room table, their blueprints and models spread out amidst the normalcy of my home, a perfect fusion of their two worlds. The Rossis did not go quietly. Giuseppe launched a frivolous lawsuit against me, which my legal team dismantled in a matter of weeks. Sophia embarked on a smear campaign in the society pages, but the whispers about the eccentric, reclusive Eleanor Vance were soon overshadowed by the more compelling story of their daughter's defection and their own increasingly erratic behavior. They had lost the only battle that truly mattered, the battle for their daughter's heart and mind. One evening, 6 months after the dinner at Daniel, the three of us, Liam, Isabella, and I, were in the garden, celebrating the landing of their first major client. The air was warm, filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the sound of our laughter. Liam grilled vegetables, Isabella tossed a salad, and I set the table with my simple, mismatched plates. It was a scene of ordinary, profound happiness. My secured phone buzzed in my pocket, a new alert. I excused myself and walked to the edge of the garden, reading the message from David. It was a final update on the Rossis. Giuseppe's frantic financial maneuvers had backfired spectacularly. He was facing bankruptcy and multiple investigations. Sophia had checked herself into a private clinic in Switzerland, exhausted by the effort of maintaining a facade that had finally cracked. I deleted the message and looked back at the scene on the patio. Liam was whispering something in Isabella's ear, making her laugh. She leaned into him, her face radiant with a joy that was entirely her own. I thought about the woman I had been, the Sphinx, the strategist, the ghost. I thought about the woman I had pretended to be, the simple, retired mother. And I looked at the woman I was now, standing in the twilight, watching her son build a beautiful, honest life with a woman who had chosen courage over comfort. The fortress was gone. In its place was a home, with its doors and windows thrown open to the world, its walls strong not with concrete and steel, but with truth and love. I had spent a lifetime building impenetrable walls to keep danger out, only to discover that the greatest safety, the only safety that truly matters, is found not in hiding, but in being truly seen. I walked back to the table, to my family. Liam handed me a glass of wine. "Everything okay, Mom?" I looked at his face, so open, so trusting again, and at Isabella's warm, supportive smile. "Everything," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being, "is perfect."